The day before I was set to marry Liam, my phone buzzed with a text from him. It was supposed to be a day of quiet joy, a gentle hum of anticipation for the life we were about to begin. But the words on the screen were not about last-minute seating charts or happy butterflies. "My mother is insisting you join us for dinner tonight." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a proper invitation. It was a royal command, and a familiar coldness coiled in the pit of my stomach. For years, his mother, Isabella Valenti, had treated me with a kind of polite, surgical scrutiny. Her questions were less about getting to know me and more like an audit of my entire existence. With every visit, she would appraise me, her smile a beautifully crafted mask that never touched her sharp, calculating eyes. I knew this dinner wasn't a pre-wedding celebration. It was a final examination. I resolved to go, to play the part of the graceful future daughter-in-law. But by the time the night was over, she would lean toward her husband, Giorgio, and whisper a single venomous sentence in Italian, having completely forgotten about the year I spent working in Florence. She had forgotten I was fluent in her language. She didn't realize I understood every last syllable. And the words I spoke back to her changed the course of everything. But before we get to that, do me a favor and hit the like button. Subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know. My name is Clara Hayes. I'm 30 years old, and for the last 10 of those years, I've been meticulously constructing a life I could be proud of piece by piece. I work as a brand strategist, a job that's all about understanding what makes people tick, their desires, their insecurities, their core values. It's a skill that has served me incredibly well in corporate boardrooms, but it has proven to be utterly useless when facing my future mother-in-law. My self-sufficiency isn't a political statement. It's simply the reality of my life. I have my own condo with a view of the Chicago skyline, a career that both challenges me and gives me purpose, and a sense of self that feels solid, earned through years of hard work. I've never looked for someone to complete me, which is precisely how I knew that my love for Liam was the real deal. It wasn't born out of need, but out of a deliberate, joyful choice. Tomorrow was meant to be the start of our forever. It sounds like a line from a greeting card until you're the one on the precipice of it. The day before your wedding is a strange, suspended moment. All the planning is finished, yet the main event hasn't begun. My dress, a simple column of ivory crepe, was hanging in a protective bag on my closet door, waiting. The flowers, arrangements of white hydrangeas and silver dollar eucalyptus, were scheduled for delivery to the venue in the morning. Our shared playlist, a painstakingly curated blend of old soul music and modern folk, was finalized. Liam's suit was pressed and waiting at his own apartment. We had planned for a small, intimate ceremony at a historic conservatory, followed by a dinner with the people who mattered most to us. It was designed to be a day that was purely about us, a quiet testament to the steady, uncomplicated love we had built together. But that single text message, relaying the command from Isabella, made my stomach clench. It was a familiar sensation, a specific kind of dread I had come to associate only with her. The quiet joy of the day ahead dissolved, replaced by the weary tension of someone preparing for a confrontation. This was not how it was supposed to be. The night before our wedding, I should have been having a glass of wine with my sister, or soaking in a long bath, or just sitting on my couch with Liam, our hands intertwined, soaking in the sweet hum of what was to come. Instead, I was mentally steeling myself for an evening of coded language, of smiles that were merely a baring of teeth. I met Liam 3 years ago at a professional networking event. He was speaking on a panel, an investment banker with a sharp mind and a refreshingly direct manner. He was brilliant without being arrogant, self-assured, without being domineering. He noticed me in the crowd during the QA session when I posed a question that challenged one of his assertions. I half expected him to be dismissive, but instead he smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his entire face. "That's a fantastic point," he said into the microphone. I hadn't looked at it from that angle. Later, he sought me out by the refreshments table. We ended up talking for nearly 2 hours about everything from emerging market economies to our mutual appreciation for terrible 80s action movies. With Liam, everything was effortless. He saw me, the real me, and never once asked me to be anyone else. His family, on the other hand, was an entirely different universe. His father, Giorgio, was a gentle, quiet man, a retired civil engineer with kind eyes who seemed truly happy for his son. But Isabella was different. She was the undisputed matriarch of the Valenti clan, carrying herself with an air of unshakable authority. Her posture was always perfect, her designer clothes immaculate, her home a pristine gallery where no object was ever out of place. From our very first meeting, she made it abundantly clear that I was under evaluation. Her questions always felt less like small talk and more like a deposition. "Clara, your parents are in Michigan, is that correct?" she asked the first time Liam brought me over. "Yes, near Ann Arbor," I replied, offering my most charming smile. "And what is it they do?" "My father owns a small hardware store, and my mother is a high school English teacher." She nodded slowly, her expression impossible to read. How sweet. "So, no professional background in your family then?" It wasn't a question. It was a classification. I was being neatly filed away in a box labeled Other. Over the next 3 years, the subtle interrogations never stopped. Each one felt more invasive than the last. She inquired about my university, my previous employers, my savings account, even the social standing of my closest friends. She would praise my independence in a way that framed it as a character flaw. "It's just wonderful that you've been so dedicated to your career, dear," she would say, her voice as smooth as cream. "So many young women your age are already thinking about stepping back, focusing on a family. A different set of priorities, I suppose." The subtext was always crystal clear. My priorities were incorrect. I was too ambitious, too self-reliant, too American. I was not the sort of woman she had pictured for her eldest son. She wanted someone who would assimilate seamlessly into the Valenti family, someone whose life would orbit around Liam, someone pliable. I was not pliable. Liam was always a wonderful shield. He would gently redirect the conversation or answer on my behalf with a proud smile. "Clara's the best at what she does, Mom. That's why her clients value her so much." I smiled through the discomfort, telling myself it would soften with time. I convinced myself that once we were married, she would have no choice but to see me as family, and the endless testing would finally cease. Now, standing in my sun-drenched apartment, the sounds of Chicago, a distant hum below, I understood how naive I had been. This dinner was not a gesture of inclusion. It was a final exam. She wanted me on her home turf, under her authority, one last time before I officially became a Valenti. It was a power play, a stark reminder of who held the authority in her world. A knot of anger tightened in my chest. I was angry at her for her relentless judgment, but I was also angry with myself for allowing it to burrow so deep under my skin. I was a confident, accomplished woman. I had negotiated 7-figure contracts and navigated treacherous corporate landscapes. Why did this one woman have the power to make me feel so small and inadequate? I walked into my bedroom and looked at the ivory dress hanging on the door. It was a symbol of my future, of the life Liam and I were about to create. We were a team. Our love was a quiet, solid fortress we had built for ourselves, and I realized that whatever his mother thought of me, her opinions couldn't breach those walls. They couldn't diminish our love or alter who we were together. Her approval was not a prerequisite for my happiness. My happiness was something I had forged on my own, and now I was choosing to share it with her son. With a sudden, newfound sense of clarity, I opened my closet. I would not allow her to intimidate me. I would not let her poison the beautiful anticipation of my own wedding day. I would attend this dinner, and I would be nothing but myself, polite, strong, and unshakable. I would smile, I would answer her questions, and I would let her see once and for all that her opinion of me did not define me. I was Clara Hayes, and tomorrow I would be Clara Hayes Valenti. Her tactics, her tests, her veiled insults, they were her baggage to carry. They had no power over me unless I chose to give it to them, and I was done giving it. I would face her one last time, not as a nervous girl begging for acceptance, but as the woman her son loved, a woman who was worthy of respect whether it was freely given or not. The drive to the Valenti home felt 10 times longer than usual. The familiar Chicago streets, which usually felt like home, seemed foreign and hostile. Every stoplight was a forced pause, making me sit with the anxiety churning in my gut. I had spent a full hour getting ready, not out of vanity, but as if I were methodically putting on armor. I had chosen a simple, elegant black sheath dress, a color that was serious and classic. It was professional, a quiet declaration that I was not a child arriving for a lecture. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, low chignon, and my makeup was minimal. I wanted my face to be a clear, open book, with nothing to hide behind. My outward appearance was a study in calm composure, a perfect mask for the storm inside. On the passenger seat, a small, beautifully wrapped box of artisanal pastries sat, a peace offering I felt obligated to bring. It felt like paying tribute to a foreign monarch whose favor you desperately needed but knew you would never truly possess. When I pulled into their long brick-paved driveway, the house loomed before me. It was a beautiful, sprawling Tudor, the kind of old-money estate that was both impressive and deeply intimidating. Warm light glowed from every window, but it offered me no comfort. I took one last deep breath in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. "You can do this," I whispered to the empty car. It was the same mantra I repeated before a major client pitch or a difficult negotiation. The absurdity of needing a pep talk to have dinner with my fiancé's parents the night before my own wedding was not lost on me. Giorgio opened the door before I had a chance to ring the bell. His face split into a warm, genuine smile that instantly eased some of the tension in my shoulders. "Clara, come in, come in. We are so glad to see you." He took my coat and the box of pastries, giving my arm a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "It's good to see you too, Giorgio," I said, and I meant it. In the quiet war of attrition with Isabella, Giorgio had always been a sliver of neutral ground, a small, safe harbor. He was a man of few words, but his kindness was evident in his small gestures. I followed him into the formal living room, a space as beautiful and unnervingly perfect as the rest of the house. A fire crackled in the grand fireplace, casting a warm glow on the polished hardwood floors and antique furniture. And there, standing by the mantelpiece with a glass of white wine in her hand, was Isabella. She turned as I entered, and her smile was exactly as I had anticipated, a perfectly executed gesture that didn't come close to reaching her eyes. It was a smile for a camera, not for a person. "Clara, dear." "You made it," she said, her voice a smooth, melodic purr. "You look so slender in that dress. Aren't you cold?" There it was, the first volley. Slender. A word that could be a compliment, but from her lips it sounded like an accusation. Frail, weak, not substantial enough for my son. I refused to take the bait. I offered a soft, easy laugh, as if I'd taken it as the compliment she pretended it was. "I'm perfectly warm, thank you, Isabella. The fire is lovely." Liam wasn't there yet. He'd called to say he was stuck in traffic coming from the financial district. I knew it was the truth, but his absence left me feeling completely exposed. Without his presence to act as a buffer, I was alone with his parents on the battlefield she had meticulously prepared. Giorgio offered me a glass of wine, which I accepted gratefully, just to have something to do with my hands. We engaged in stilted small talk for a few minutes. I asked Giorgio about his workshop, and he spoke animatedly about a birdhouse he was building. Isabella remained mostly silent, observing me over the rim of her glass, her gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. Finally, Liam arrived, a whirlwind of apologies, and a big warm hug for me that I sank into with profound relief. "Sorry I'm late, Mom, Dad. The traffic was a nightmare." He kissed his mother on the cheek and clapped his father on the shoulder. With his arrival, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. It became lighter, less charged. He was the sun around which the Valenti family orbited, and his presence brought a warmth I could never hope to generate on my own. We moved to the dining room for dinner. The table was set with flawless porcelain and gleaming silver. Isabella was an impeccable hostess. I had to give her that. She had prepared chicken cacciatore, Liam's favorite. The meal was, on the surface, a perfectly pleasant affair. Liam talked about a deal he was closing at work. Giorgio shared a funny story about a stubborn city inspector from his engineering days, and I did my best to be an engaging, charming guest. But every interaction with Isabella felt like a carefully choreographed dance. Every compliment she paid me was double-edged. Every question was a hidden test. "That new campaign your firm launched was very bold, Clara," she commented after I mentioned a recent project. "I saw it on a digital billboard. Very eye-catching." "Thank you," I said. "We've had a great response to it." "I'm sure," she mused, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "It must be a very demanding job. Long hours, I imagine. It will be a challenge to balance that with a husband, a home." Liam jumped in. "Clara's incredible at balancing things, Mom. She accomplishes more in a day than most people do in a week." I shot him a grateful smile. But Isabella's point had been made. My career wasn't an asset. It was a liability, a future conflict of interest with my duties as a wife. The conversation drifted to our wedding plans. Isabella had pushed for a large traditional Catholic wedding, followed by a lavish reception for 500 guests. We had gently but firmly insisted on our small civil ceremony. It was a point of contention that had been simmering for months. "A small wedding can be very charming," Isabella said, the word charming sounding like a euphemism for inadequate. "It's a shame your family couldn't all be here from Michigan, but it is such a long way for them to travel, I suppose." "My sister is here, and my parents arrived this morning," I said, keeping my tone light. "We wanted something small and personal. It felt right for us." "Of course, dear," she said, her smile never faltering. "It's your day. It should be exactly what you want, even if it's unconventional." And so it went, for 2 solid hours. A polite, civilized dinner that was layered with subtle digs, passive-aggressive remarks, and veiled criticisms. I felt like I was navigating a minefield, carefully considering every single step, every word. I parried her thrusts with polite smiles and neutral statements. I refused to get flustered, to show any sign of anger or hurt. I was playing a game, and the only way to win was to not play at all. I became a gray rock, smooth and uninteresting, giving her nothing to latch on to, nothing to use against me. Liam, bless his heart, seemed largely oblivious. He saw a pleasant family dinner, his mother being a bit formal perhaps, but nothing out of the ordinary. He couldn't see the intricate web of meaning behind her words, the carefully constructed battlefield on which I stood alone. He held my hand under the table, a loving, unconscious gesture that was the only thing keeping me grounded. By the time dessert was served, I was emotionally drained. Isabella brought out a beautiful homemade crostata, her specialty. It was a gesture that from anyone else would have been warm and generous. From her, it felt like another demonstration of her domestic perfection, another arena where I, a woman whose oven was mostly used for storage, would inevitably fall short. Still, I accepted a slice and praised it accordingly. The rich, jam-filled pastry was delicious, but I could barely taste it. Every muscle in my body was tense, coiled like a spring. I just wanted the evening to be over. I wanted to be at home, in my own apartment, where the air wasn't thick with unspoken judgment. We were lingering over espresso when Liam's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, a frown creasing his brow. "I'm so sorry," he said, pushing his chair back. "It's my director. There's an urgent issue with the quarterly reports from the London office. I have to take this. I'll be right back." He leaned down and kissed the top of my head, his hand squeezing my shoulder reassuringly before he stepped out of the dining room and into the hall, his voice dropping to a low, serious murmur. The moment the door swung shut behind him, the atmosphere in the room changed. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The polite facade that Isabella had maintained in her son's presence dissolved, and the temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Giorgio shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze and taking a sudden deep interest in the dregs of his espresso cup. The silence was heavy, oppressive. It was just the three of us now, and I felt a fresh wave of anxiety. I was a lone soldier left on the battlefield after my reinforcements had been called away. I took a slow sip of my own coffee, my mind racing for a neutral topic to fill the silence. But before I could speak, Isabella leaned across the table, a conspiratorial glint in her eye. She looked at her husband, a small, knowing smirk playing on her lips. She believed I was completely cut off from her world, an outsider who couldn't possibly understand her native tongue. She saw me only as Liam's American girlfriend, a girl from Michigan with no connection to her Italian roots. She had no idea about the year I had spent in Florence, a challenging but transformative assignment early in my career. I had been sent there to help launch a new branch of my strategy firm. I had arrived knowing only a handful of phrases from a tourist guidebook, but had left a year later fluent, my tongue comfortable with the lyrical cadence of the language. It was a part of my life I rarely mentioned, a skill I had no reason to advertise. To the Valentis, I had never given any indication that I was anything other than what I appeared to be. And so, she felt safe. She felt invisible. She turned to Giorgio, and in a low, confidential whisper, a whisper that was perfectly audible in the quiet room, she spoke in Italian. "Ha delle belle maniere, certo, ma la sua ambizione sarà un peso." She followed it with a soft, breathy little laugh. Giorgio glanced at me, a flicker of something, guilt, unease, in his eyes, before he gave a weak, complicit chuckle and shook his head as if indulging a private joke. They shared a look, a moment of secret alliance that deliberately and cruelly excluded me. They were two against one, bonded by a language they thought was a shield. But it wasn't a shield. It was a sword. and it had just been plunged directly into my heart. The words echoed in my ears, sharp and clear, each one a separate sting. Ha del belle manière, certo. She has pretty manners, of course. The dismissive acknowledgement of the very quality I had been straining to maintain all night. My politeness wasn't seen as strength or grace. It was a temporary performance, a mask that would soon fall away. Ma la sua ambizione sarà un peso. But her ambition will be a burden. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. She thought my career, my drive, the very things I was most proud of were a liability, a burden her son would have to carry. After 3 years of knowing me, of seeing my independence, my work ethic, my genuine love for her son, this was her final verdict. I was a problem to be managed, an anchor that would eventually weigh Liam down. The insult was breathtaking in its cruelty, not just for the words themselves, but for the casual, confident way she had delivered them, so certain of my ignorance. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just sat there, the fancy dessert turning to ash in my mouth. A strange, cold calm washed over me, pushing aside the initial shock and the searing hurt. It was the kind of clarity that comes only in moments of profound betrayal. All the small cuts, the veiled criticisms, the constant tests from the past 3 years suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't just about her being overprotective. This was about a deep, unshakable disdain she held for me. She didn't know me at all. She had never tried to. She had looked at my life, my background, my independence, and she had seen a threat. And now, she had finally said the quiet part out loud. The game was over. The polite fiction we had all been maintaining had been shattered by that one whispered sentence. I looked at her, truly looked at her, as she took a delicate bite of her crostata, the picture of refined elegance, completely unaware that her world was about to shift on its axis. And in that moment, I knew I could not let it stand. I would not let her believe she had won. The silence in the room was a living thing. It buzzed in my ears, thick with the echo of Isabella's words. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples, a slow, steady rhythm. The initial sting of her insult had faded, replaced by something else, something harder and colder. It was not anger, not in the hot, messy way I might have expected. It was a profound and sudden sense of resolve. I had spent 3 years trying to earn this woman's approval, contorting myself into a version of a future daughter-in-law that I thought she would accept. I had been polite, I had been deferential, I had been patient, and it had all been for nothing. She had never seen me. She had only ever seen the caricature she had created in her own mind. In that ringing silence, I made a choice. I would not cry, I would not yell, I would not cause a scene that Liam would walk back into, confused and distressed. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Instead, I would meet her on her own terms, on her own battlefield. I would use the very language she had used as a weapon against her. My movements were slow and deliberate. I placed my fork gently on the side of my dessert plate, the small clink of metal against china sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. I carefully dabbed the corners of my mouth with my linen napkin, folded it, and placed it on the table. Then I pushed my chair back, the legs making a soft scraping sound against the polished hardwood floor. Both Isabella and Giorgio looked up, startled by the sudden movement. Their expressions were ones of mild surprise, expecting me to excuse myself to the restroom, perhaps. They had no idea what was coming. I stood up. I didn't walk towards the hallway where Liam was. I walked around the large mahogany dining table, my steps measured and silent. My black dress swished softly around my knees. I felt strangely disconnected from my own body, as if I were watching a scene in a movie. I saw myself, a calm, composed woman, walking towards her unsuspecting adversary. Isabella's eyes followed me, a flicker of confusion in their dark depths. Giorgio looked down at his plate, refusing to meet my gaze. He knew on some level that he was a coward, a silent co-conspirator in his wife's cruelty. I stopped right beside Isabella's chair. She had to crane her neck to look up at me. For the first time all evening, I had the advantage. I was not the guest sitting at her table. I was a woman standing on her own 2 feet. I looked down at her and offered a small, serene smile. It was not a fake smile, not like the ones she had been giving me. It was genuine, but it was not warm. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards. Then I reached down and gently took her hand where it rested on the table. Her skin was soft but cool. Her hand was limp in mine, her surprise evident in her lack of response. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, waiting. I leaned in just slightly, lowering my voice to a near whisper, mirroring the same confidential tone she had used moments before, and in the same fluent, perfect Italian she thought I couldn't understand, I spoke. "Non si deve preoccupare, signora Valenti," I began, my voice soft but firm. "Don't you worry, Mrs. Valenti." Her eyes widened instantly. It was a small, almost imperceptible reaction, but I saw it. The shock hit her like a physical blow. Her mask of polite superiority didn't just crack, it shattered. I felt a slight tremor in the hand I was holding. I continued, my gaze holding hers, my smile never wavering. "Non ho mai avuto bisogno di nessuno per portare il mio peso." I have never needed anyone to carry my weight. I let the words hang in the air for a beat, letting her absorb the full impact of what was happening. I was speaking her language. I had understood everything. The private, ugly thought she had shared with her husband was now laid bare between us. I gave her hand a gentle, almost motherly pat and finished my thought. "Costruisco le mie fondamenta, e le costruisco per durare." I build my own foundations, and I build them to last. I let go of her hand and straightened up. The entire exchange had taken less than 30 seconds, but the power dynamic in the room had been permanently altered. Isabella was staring at me, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, humiliation, and, perhaps for the first time, a sliver of fear. She was speechless. Giorgio was frozen, his face a mask of disbelief, looking back and forth between his wife and me. The silence that descended upon the room was absolute, profound, and utterly delicious. It was the sound of checkmate. Just then, the dining room door swung open, and Liam walked back in, a cheerful smile on his face. "All sorted," he announced, his voice booming in the silent room. He stopped short, his smile faltering as he took in the scene. He saw me standing. He saw his mother's chalk-white face and his father's stunned expression. The tension was a thick, unbreathable fog. "What's wrong?" he asked, his eyes finding mine, full of confusion. Did I miss something? I turned to him and gave him a genuine warm smile, the first one I had felt all night. "Not at all," I said, my voice perfectly even. "Your mother and I were just having a little chat." I was just about to head out. I walked over to him, looped my arm through his, and gave him a light kiss on the cheek. I turned back to his parents. "Thank you for dinner, Isabella, Giorgio." It was illuminating. I didn't wait for a reply. I let Liam lead me out of the dining room, down the hall, and out the front door into the cool night air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I would have seen. A woman who had built her entire world on a foundation of control, sitting in stunned silence, having just realized she had lost it completely. The battle was over, and I had won. The drive home from the Valenti house was a blur. The city lights of Chicago smeared past my windows, but I barely saw them. I replayed the last 30 seconds of the evening over and over in my mind. The widening of Isabella's eyes, the dead silence, the look of utter shock on her face. There was no sense of giddy triumph, no thrill of victory. Instead, a heavy, profound sense of clarity settled over me. It was the feeling of a chapter closing, decisively and forever. The Clara who had walked into that house, desperate for approval and willing to endure silent cuts to get it, was not the same Clara who had just walked out. When I got back to my condo, the silence was a welcome relief. This was my space, a place I had built and curated, a reflection of my own life and my own tastes. It was calm and orderly, and tonight it felt like a sanctuary. I took off the black dress, my armor, and changed into a soft t-shirt and worn-in sweatpants. I made a cup of chamomile tea, the familiar ritual soothing my frayed nerves. I sat on my couch, curled my feet under me, and stared at the city lights twinkling outside my window. The wedding was in less than 12 hours. My fiancé was at his apartment, probably fielding confused questions from his parents. My family was at their hotel, sleeping soundly, dreaming of the happy day to come. And I was here, in the quiet of my apartment, feeling more alone and more myself than I had in a very long time. Something inside me felt restless. The confrontation with Isabella had been like a lightning strike, illuminating everything. It showed me the truth of my situation with her, but it also lit up a truth about myself. I had been playing small, trying to fit into a box that was never designed to hold me. My independence, my ambition, my career, I had subconsciously downplayed them around the Valentis, hoping to appear less threatening, more acceptable. Tonight had shown me the futility of that effort. On instinct, I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, pulling me back into the world where I was not Liam's fiancé or Isabella's problem, but simply Clara Hayes, brand strategist. I scrolled through my emails without thinking, deleting junk mail, flagging items for Monday, and then I saw it. An email from 3 weeks ago from an international executive search firm. The subject line read, "Confidential Inquiry, Director of European Strategy, Florence." I had almost forgotten about it. The recruiter had reached out saying a client, a major global luxury brand, was looking for a new director for their European headquarters in Florence. It was a massive step up, a role with huge responsibility and creative freedom. At the time, with wedding planning in full swing, I had politely told the recruiter that I wasn't looking to make a move, but I had kept the email, a small, secret part of me intrigued by the possibility. It felt too big, too disruptive to even consider. Now, I opened it again. I read the job description slowly, the words seeming to leap off the page. Lead international campaigns, manage a multicultural team, drive brand strategy across the European market. It was everything I had ever worked for, the kind of job I had dreamed of in business school. And the location, Florence, the city where I had found my footing as a young professional, the place where I had learned the very language that had become my shield tonight. It felt like a sign, a bizarre and stunning twist of fate. I clicked the link to the company's career portal, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The position was still listed. On a whim, propelled by the strange, defiant energy of the evening, I found the formal offer letter the recruiter had sent as a follow-up. I had glanced at it before, but had never truly absorbed the details. 1-year contract with option to extend, competitive 6-figure salary, full relocation benefits, corporate housing in the Oltrarno district. It wasn't a vague inquiry. It was a concrete, life-changing opportunity sitting right here in my inbox. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I leaned back in my chair, my mind reeling. An hour ago, my future had seemed so clear. I would marry Liam. We would live in Chicago. We would build a life here, and I would continue to navigate the polite, cold war with his mother. Now, a different path had appeared, a dazzling, terrifying fork in the road. What would Liam think? The question hammered at me, drowning out everything else. We had built our future around Chicago. His career was here. His family was here. We were getting married tomorrow. To bring this up now, on the eve of our wedding, felt like an act of emotional sabotage. It felt like a betrayal. I could already hear Isabella's voice in my head, whispering her new verdict. "See, I told you she was selfish. I told you she would put herself first. She is leaving him before they are even married." This offer, this incredible, validating opportunity, would look like proof of everything she believed me to be. It would look like I was running away from our new life before it had even begun. Would Liam see it that way too? Would he see it as my ambition winning out over my love for him? Would he think that my response to his mother was not about self-respect, but about finding an excuse to leave? The thought was a physical pain, a sharp ache in my chest. The idea of hurting him, of shattering the beautiful trust we had built, was unbearable. He was a man who had only ever supported me, who had celebrated my successes as if they were his own. How could I do this to him? But how could I not? How could I ignore this? To delete the email, to pretend I had never seen it again, felt like a betrayal of myself. It would mean that Isabella, in a way, had won. It would mean I was choosing to play small, to silence a part of myself in order to keep the peace. The very thought felt like suffocation. My confrontation with her had been about demanding respect, about refusing to be diminished. If I backed away from this opportunity out of fear of how it would look, wasn't I just diminishing myself? I sat there for what felt like hours, the glowing screen of the laptop illuminating my face. My future was no longer a single straight line. It was a complex, messy, and terrifying choice. I loved Liam more than anything, but I also had to love myself. And I didn't know if it was possible in this moment to do both. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, watching the slivers of moonlight move across the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of Florence and Chicago, of love and ambition. The wedding dress hanging on my door seemed to mock me, a symbol of a future that had suddenly become uncertain. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw two paths diverging. On one, I was in Chicago, married to the man I loved, my life comfortable and predictable, but with a quiet, nagging question of what if echoing in the background. On the other, I was in Florence, professionally fulfilled and challenged, but potentially alone, having fractured the most important relationship of my life. Was there a third path? One where I didn't have to choose? By the time the first gray light of dawn began to creep into my room, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't walk down the aisle with this secret. I couldn't say my vows to Liam, knowing that I was hiding something so monumental, something that would affect not just my life, but his and ours. Our marriage had to be built on a foundation of absolute honesty, and that foundation had to be laid right now before we made our promises. To wait would be an act of cowardice. The real vow wasn't the one I would make in front of our families in a few hours. It was the one I had to make now, to trust him with the whole, complicated truth of who I was. My hand was trembling as I reached for my phone on the nightstand. It was just after 6 in the morning. I knew he would be awake, probably as restless as I was. I found his name in my contacts and pressed the call button before I could lose my nerve. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice thick with sleep but laced with concern. "Clara, is everything okay?" "Hi," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I cleared my throat and sat up in bed. "I'm okay. I need to tell you something, and it has to be now, before anything else happens today." The line was quiet for a moment. I could hear the seriousness in my own voice, and I knew he could too. "Okay," he said slowly, the sleepiness gone, replaced by focused attention. "I'm listening." I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. I told him about the email from the recruiter, the one that had come weeks ago, the one I had dismissed. I told him about opening it last night after I got home from his parents' house. I explained the job: Director of European Strategy, Florence, the international travel, the level of responsibility. I laid it all out: the facts, the figures, the incredible scope of the opportunity. I didn't frame it as a decision I had made. I framed it as a reality that now existed, a new piece on the board that we had to look at together. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. I was terrified of his reaction, of the silence I was sure would follow. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. In that silence, all my fears swirled around me. He was going to say I was selfish. He was going to accuse me of ruining our wedding day. He was going to think this was my way of getting out, that his mother had been right about me all along. I held my breath, bracing myself for the impact. And then he spoke. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "Florence," he said, tasting the word. There was another short pause, and then he let out a soft, low chuckle. It was not a laugh of derision or anger. It was a sound of genuine surprise, of wonder. "Wow, Clara," he said, his voice full of something I couldn't quite decipher. "That's incredible. A director for a brand like that? That's huge." I was so stunned by his reaction that I couldn't speak. I had been prepared for a fight, for hurt feelings, for a crisis. I was not prepared for this. "You're so talented, Clara," he continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident. "Of course they want you. Anyone would be crazy not to." He paused again, and this time I could hear the smile in his voice. "We always talked about living abroad someday. Maybe someday just came a little sooner than we planned." The relief that washed over me was so powerful, it made me dizzy. It was a physical release of tension, a great, shuddering wave that left me weak. Tears I hadn't even realized were welling up began to slip down my cheeks. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt. He didn't see it as a betrayal. He saw it as an opportunity, for me and for us. He chose me, he chose us, without a moment's hesitation. "Really?" I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Really," he said firmly. "My job is flexible. I can work from anywhere. It's an adventure, Clara. Our first one as a married couple." Then his tone shifted, becoming more serious. "The only thing that matters is that we do it together." We talked for a few more minutes, the logistics and the fears giving way to a shared excitement. It was real. We were going to do this. And then, just before we hung up, he grew quiet again. "By the way," he said, his voice laced with amusement, "whatever you said to my mother last night, she's still speechless. My dad called me after you left. He said he's never seen her like that. She wouldn't even tell him what you said, just that you said it in perfect Italian." I let out a shaky laugh. It was a long time coming. "Well," Liam said, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable, "you never cease to amaze me, Clara Hayes." When we hung up the phone, I lay back against my pillows, the morning sun now streaming through the window, bathing the room in a warm golden light. everything had changed. The fear and uncertainty had vanished, replaced by a profound sense of peace and a love for Liam that felt deeper and more solid than ever before. He hadn't just accepted my ambition, he had embraced it as part of our shared journey. He hadn't just listened to my truth, he had made it his own. Our wedding day was no longer just the start of our marriage. It was the start of our greatest adventure, and we were walking into it together as a team. Our wedding ceremony was exactly as we had planned it, intimate, simple, and full of light. The room we rented in the historic conservatory had floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and the late morning sun streamed in, glinting off the lush greenery inside. There were only 30 guests, our closest family and friends, their faces a warm and welcome sight. My sister, my maid of honor, squeezed my hand just before we walked in, her eyes shining. "You look beautiful," she whispered, "and so calm." I smiled because it was true. The storm had passed in the early hours of the morning, and all that was left was a deep, peaceful calm. As I walked towards Liam, I saw nothing but his face. He was smiling, a look of such open, unguarded love in his eyes that it took my breath away. In that moment, there was no Florence, no Isabella, no lingering drama. There was only him, there was only us. Our vows were simple, words we had written ourselves, promises not of perfection but of partnership. We promised to be honest, to support each other's dreams, and to always be on the same team. As I spoke the words, I knew they had already been tested and proven true. Out of the corner of my eye, I was aware of his parents in the front row. Giorgio watched us with a gentle, warm expression, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a genuine smile. He caught my eye once and gave me a small, encouraging nod, a silent apology and a gesture of peace all in one. Isabella stood beside him, her posture as stiff and perfect as ever. She was a statue of maternal disapproval, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her face a carefully blank mask. She did not look at me, she did not smile, but she was there, and for now, that had to be enough. During the dinner that followed, the atmosphere was light and joyful. Our friends and family mingled, their laughter filling the room. Liam and I moved from table to table, accepting hugs and congratulations, feeling utterly surrounded by love. When it came time for our first dance, Liam pulled me close. The band played a slow, quiet song, and we swayed together in the center of the room, lost in our own world. "This is our start," he whispered into my ear, his lips brushing against my skin. "Not theirs, ours." I leaned my head against his shoulder, my heart feeling so full I thought it might burst. "I love you," I whispered back. "Thank you for being you." "Always," he said, holding me tighter. Later in the evening, I saw Isabella pull Liam aside. They stood near the large windows overlooking the conservatory gardens, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the twilight. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could read their body language. Her voice was tight, her gestures sharp and constrained. She was pleading, or perhaps demanding. Liam, in contrast, was a pillar of calm. He stood with his hands in his pockets, listening patiently. He didn't argue or raise his voice. He just listened. And then he spoke for a minute, his expression firm but gentle. She stared at him, her face unreadable, and then turned and walked stiffly back to her table without another word. A few minutes later, Liam came back to my side, slipping his arm around my waist. He looked completely untroubled. "Everything okay?" I asked quietly. He nodded, taking a sip of his champagne. "She thinks the move to Italy is reckless," he said, his voice matter of fact. "She thinks you're pulling me away from my family, my career, my home." My stomach tightened. It was exactly what I had feared she would say. What did you tell her? Liam turned to look at me, his eyes serious and clear. I told her that my career will be fine. I told her that family is something we carry with us. And I told her, he said, a small smile playing on his lips, that home isn't a place, it's a person, and my home is wherever you are. He sealed his words with a kiss, soft and sure, and in that moment, I understood. We were truly free. Her power over us, her ability to sow doubt and insecurity, was gone. It had been replaced by the quiet, unshakable strength of our partnership. Liam had drawn a line, not in anger, but in love, a line that protected us, that defined us as a new family, a unit of two. Isabella could stand on the other side of that line, in her world of fear and control, but she could no longer cross it. The rest of the night passed in a happy blur of cake, champagne, and dancing. As we prepared to leave, making our way through a sea of well-wishes, Giorgio came up and gave me a hug. "Be happy, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are a wonderful woman. He is a lucky man. It was his blessing, and it meant more to me than he could ever know." Isabella offered a cool, dry cheek for me to kiss. There were no words, no congratulations, but there was no overt hostility either. There was only a truce, a quiet acknowledgement of her defeat. As Liam and I rode away in the car, the lights of Chicago casting a warm glow around us, I rested my head on his shoulder. We were married. We were moving to Italy. Our life was a blank page, and we held the pen. It was a terrifying and exhilarating feeling. We were leaving a great deal behind, but we were walking toward our future, together, hand in hand. Florence was not a gentle transition. It was a full sensory immersion. The city was a symphony of noise and life, a constant hum of scooters, the melodic chatter of Italian in the cafes, and the distant ringing of church bells. It was bright, chaotic, and relentless. We arrived in late September with 4 oversized suitcases and a shared sense of nervous excitement. Our corporate apartment in the Oltrarno district was beautiful, with high ceilings and a tiny balcony that overlooked a cobblestone street. It didn't feel like home yet, but it felt like an adventure. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. I dove headfirst into my new job. The work was more challenging and more rewarding than I could have imagined. I was leading a team of talented people from all over Europe, and our days were a fast-paced mix of English, Italian, and French. I worked long hours, fueled by espresso and adrenaline, and I loved every minute of it. I felt competent, respected, and creatively fulfilled in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. This was the work I was meant to be doing. Liam, true to his word, was my rock. He seamlessly transitioned his projects online, setting up an office in our spare bedroom. He embraced our new life with an open heart, never once making me feel guilty for the upheaval. While I was at the office, he took on the task of making Florence our home. He navigated the bureaucracy of getting our residency permits, discovered the best local markets for fresh pasta and produce, and enrolled us both in an Italian cooking class. In the evenings, we would explore the city together, getting lost in the labyrinthine streets, discovering tiny trattorias, and slowly, surely building a life for ourselves, just the two of us. It was a second honeymoon, a phase of discovery not just of a new city, but of a new depth to our partnership. Communication with the Valentis was sparse and cautious. Liam called his father once a week, and their conversations were warm and easy. His calls with his mother, however, were stilted and brief. I never listened in, but I could tell from Liam's side of the conversation that she was keeping a careful distance. For the first few months, my only contact with her came in the form of a short, formal email once a month. "Liam tells me you are enjoying your new job. I hope you are both well. Cordially, Isabella." They were like dispatches from a distant country, devoid of any real warmth or emotion. I always replied with polite, cheerful updates, sending photos of our apartment or a weekend trip we had taken. I kept it light, refusing to acknowledge the chasm between us. I wasn't going to fight for her affection anymore. I was simply living my life, and she could choose to be a part of it or not. As the autumn leaves turned golden and then fell from the trees, and the crisp Florentine air began to carry the first hints of winter, something began to shift. The emails became slightly less formal. Giorgio and I saw a documentary about the Duomo. It looked beautiful. It must be lovely to see it every day. Isabella. It was a tiny opening, a crack in the wall of indifference she had built. Then, one afternoon in early December, a letter arrived. It wasn't an email. It was a real letter. On heavy cream-colored stationery, the envelope addressed to me in elegant, unfamiliar handwriting. I opened it with a sense of trepidation. The note inside was short, the handwriting precise. Clara, it began, and the use of my first name alone was a shock. I have had much time to think these past few months. I was wrong about you. I hope that you and Liam will come home for Christmas. Your room will be waiting. Isabella. I read the letter 3 times, my heart pounding. I was wrong about you. The 4 words I never thought I would ever hear from her. It wasn't a flowery apology, but it was direct and unambiguous. It was, in its own way, as powerful as her insult had been. It was an admission. It was an invitation. It was an olive branch. That evening I showed the letter to Liam. He read it, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said, looking at me, "what do you think?" "I think," I said slowly, "that we should go." Flying back to Chicago for Christmas felt surreal. As we drove from the airport to his parents' house, I felt a flicker of the old anxiety. But it was different this time. I wasn't going into battle. I wasn't seeking approval. I was simply returning as myself to see what would happen next. Isabella opened the door. For a moment, we just stood there, a foot of space between us, the cold winter air swirling at my feet. She looked older than I remembered, softer around the edges. Then she did something I never expected. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in a hug. It was awkward. Her body was stiff and her arms were hesitant, but it was real. I could feel the tentative strength in her grip, the slight tremor in her hands. It was the hug of someone who didn't know how to apologize with words, and so was trying, clumsily, to do it with actions. I hugged her back, a silent acknowledgement that I accepted her offering. Over her shoulder, I saw Giorgio standing in the doorway, a look of profound relief on his face. The war was over. The first day of our Christmas visit was a dance of polite caution. We talked about Florence, about my job, about Liam's work. Isabella asked questions, but this time they were just questions. There were no hidden barbs, no ulterior motives. They were the questions of someone who was genuinely trying to understand our life, a life that was so different from the one she had imagined for her son. The tension that had once been a constant presence in her home was gone, replaced by a quiet, fragile peace. It was like walking on newly frozen ice. We were all treading carefully, afraid to put too much weight on it lest it crack. The breakthrough came on the second day, in the most ordinary of places, the kitchen. I had come downstairs early in the morning to find Isabella standing at the counter preparing coffee. The house was quiet, the winter sun just beginning to cast a pale light through the windows. "Good morning," I said softly. She turned a little startled, but gave me a smile. "Good morning, Clara." "Coffee." "Please," I said, leaning against the counter. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the gurgle of the coffee machine. She reached for the sugar bowl, intending to spoon some into a small pitcher. Her hand fumbled slightly, and a cascade of white sugar crystals missed the pitcher and spilled across the dark granite countertop. "Oh!" she exclaimed in frustration, a very human, un-Isabella-like sound. For some reason, the sight of her imperfection, of that messy white pool of sugar on her otherwise spotless counter, was deeply endearing. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. And then, a moment later, she laughed too. It was not her old, brittle laugh, but a genuine, throaty chuckle of shared absurdity. The sound broke the last of the tension between us, clearing the air completely. She sighed, still smiling, as she grabbed a cloth to wipe up the mess. "I only ever wanted to protect my son," she said, her back to me. Her voice was quiet, almost a confession. That is what mothers do. But I confused protection with control. She turned back around, her eyes meeting mine. They were clear and, for the first time, vulnerable. I saw not a matriarch or an adversary, but a mother who was afraid of losing her child. My own response came from a place of surprising empathy, and I confused silence with respect, I said, the words feeling true as I spoke them. "I spent so much time trying to be polite, trying to earn your approval, that I never just talked to you. I never showed you who I really was." A slow, sad smile touched her lips. She looked at me, a long, appraising look that was no longer judgmental but curious. She seemed to be seeing me clearly for the first time. She nodded, then replied in slow, halting English, her accent thick but her effort unmistakable. "I am learning your language too." The gesture was so unexpected, so deeply touching, that it caught me completely off guard. She was trying. She was meeting me halfway. The language that had once been the symbol of our divide was now becoming the foundation of our bridge. She was admitting that my world, my perspective, my language was something she needed to learn. I smiled, a real warm smile that reached my eyes. "E io la tua," I replied softly. "And I, yours." She poured 2 cups of coffee and we moved to the small breakfast table by the window. We sat there as the sun rose higher in the sky, the aroma of coffee filling the air. We didn't talk about the past again. We didn't need to. The apologies had been made, the forgiveness unspoken, but deeply felt. Instead, we talked about the future. She asked me about my favorite parts of Florence, and I told her about the art and the energy of the city. I asked her about her childhood in Italy, and she told me stories I had never heard before, of a young girl in a small village, long before she became the formidable Mrs. Valenti. When Liam and Giorgio came downstairs an hour later, they found us sitting together, laughing over a 3rd cup of coffee. They stopped in the doorway, a look of quiet astonishment on their faces. The world didn't need to change for us. The past didn't need to be rewritten. We didn't need a grand, dramatic reconciliation. All we needed was this: a quiet kitchen, a shared cup of coffee, and the simple human grace of 2 women deciding, finally, to learn each other's language. We had forgiven each other, and that was enough.